Hello, and welcome back to Coworking with Iris. Happy 2017. This is our first show of the year. We talk here about coworking and community. This is episode 30, and today I'll be talking with my friend Tony Bacigalupo. And I'm really excited about this interview. We're talking about open coworking, and also all of the other great things that Tony works on in the world, both in the coworking movement and without. And Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Iris, and happy 2017.
Yes, let's hope that this year is a good one for everybody.
We don't need to rely on hope. We've got us. We can do this. We can make it good.
I love it. Yes. Well, Tony, please, to start off with, tell us about yourself. What is your coworking story?
Oh, man. So actually, we're doing this interview January 2017. March 2017 will mark 10 years since I first discovered coworking. It was in New York City, where back then in 2007, there were no coworking spaces like we know of them today, but there was a thing called Jelly, and it was happening in a loft apartment in Midtown, and it was just a bunch of awesome folks hanging out on couches on their laptops, hanging out doing work. When I first walked into that room as a telecommuting project manager, it was the first time I was in the same room as people my age who worked for themselves. And that was a huge moment, just being exposed to that. But then the other thing was that they accepted me. Even though I was a salaried employee, I felt like I kind of didn't fit in because everyone had their own business. But they accepted me, and they made me realize that I could be one of them. And that was an absolutely life-changing moment for me. And it's a moment that I think millions of other people need to be having in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love it. I love it. Wow. Well, so you've had quite the journey since then, obviously, in 10 years. You've moved from Jellies to starting your own co-working space. Tell us a little bit about that journey that led you over to the Open Co-working Project.
Yeah, so after I found that Jelly group, I started going to it as much as I could. I started getting involved in this co-working world as much as I could. Ended up, I'm going to compress 10 years into a few seconds as best as I can, but ended up co-founding and running the first dedicated co-working space in New York called New York City. We opened that in 2008, totally bootstrapped, rode that crazy wave for up until last year, 2015, so actually previous year, 2015, and time got involved in the global movement, online and in person, going to conferences, speaking at the all of these conferences and participating in the online discussion groups. And in that time came to just realize how much of a global phenomenon this co-working thing has been, and in general, the idea of self-organized local communities of people helping each other. And so I became exposed to things like Barcamp and wikis and decentralized organizations and all of these things. And so when we closed up shop with the co-working space in New York, I wanted to focus my attention on the global movement, making it easier for everybody everywhere to build co-working communities, to build collaborative cultures wherever they are. And along that way, what I was seeing was that the people who had built the co-working movement had used these tools, these open source tools that were free, that anybody could use, anyone could administer, to build a movement, to create something that anyone could participate in, anyone could contribute to. And that was what allowed co-working to become a household name, because anyone could just start using the word, anyone could just jump in and contribute. And so all these resources got built up over the course of these sort of 10, 11 years since the co-working movement started, as a wiki, as a Google group, as a blog, as all of these different sort of open source platforms. And so what happened was eventually an organization was formed, an actual business entity. Our friend Jacob and others formed an entity to oversee these resources and make sure that they don't go away, make sure that they are able to continue to exist and be improved. And that organization was called Open Coworking. It's a Washington-based nonprofit. And so right around when I was closing up shop with my co-working space, Jacob was stepping down as the leader of that organization, and there was a need for new leadership. And so I started getting more involved in open co-working, and basically I've just been doing whatever I can to help to maintain those resources and continue to improve them so that more and more people, as they find co-working, can find the resources they need. And I've started to do a bunch of other stuff as well, but that's the gist of it, is that right now we're kind of still working on making open co-working the best organization it can be to support the global movement.
Awesome. Well, so I recall back in 2010, I believe it was, we were all in Santa Monica for a weekend, and Jacob sort of introduced the idea to the larger group, as it were, of open co-working. So it was kind of an idea, and in its infancy at that point, Jacob, I think, had been noodling on it for a little while. So give us a little bit of the history from that point, because I know some of the struggles that Jacob had was in really finding the staff and the volunteers to actually make this thing go.
Yeah, and you know what? It's still kind of a tricky, elusive thing. Building a nonprofit is a very specific kind of an effort you have to make. And building something on top of a distributed, decentralized thing, you know, it's tricky by virtue of the way that it was developed in the first place. You know, people come and go, and there are people who are passionate about co-working today, and they're going to be gone in a year, and then new people will be there. You know, and so part of what we're working on now is allowing for that to be a part of the way that that we design things going forward. So we say, look, we're not going to give somebody a job title necessarily and say, you're in charge of this and you have a title and you're the person who runs this, because that person is going to get busy and move on with something else. You know, we're not in a position to pay salaries at this point for anything. And so instead we say, look, maybe we create invitations. And we have an invitation basically coming up now where we have a volunteer session. Anybody who wants to can join. And if you want to do something, then you do it. If you want to pick up a project, then pick it up. And then if you don't ever show up again, it's fine, because there'll be other people to kind of come and pick that up as well. And so we want to kind of continue that self-organized culture. And I think that we're finally ready to kind of embrace that a little bit. It's just a matter of making the time for it, honestly, because right now, you know, we're not in a position where it pays a lot of money. There's not a lot of budget involved. And I'd love to raise a ton of money for the organization, but I think that doing that is going to require just a little bit of time and a little bit of planning to get us there. But in the meantime, I just want to make this something that's lean and mean. Anybody can come and participate in it and help contribute or contribute an idea. And then we'll go from there. And right now, one of my big focuses is on the Coworking Visa, because it's one of the most valuable and important resources that we have right now. Network. So there are something like 400 spaces that are on the Coworking Visa. And if you're a member of one, it means you can share space with all the others. And it's funny, because if you actually, like, if you count up that many locations, it's bigger than WeWork. So it's a big deal, but it's not well maintained, and so it needs to be overhauled. And that's one of the things we're really looking at for this year is making that a better experience for everybody.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said, which is that I'll paraphrase it, but basically that people who want to take a volunteer position can do so. They can come in, get some work done, and then if it's time to move on for them, that's okay. I love that approach, because it's really a guilt-free approach for volunteers. I know in my experience with running CoShare and other you know, small or volunteer-based organizations, it's incredibly difficult to run a volunteer-based organization, because you never know what kind of labor you have. You just don't have the ability to really plan based on volunteering. So if you have these shifts or these cycles as you're creating them and inviting people to come in, it allows the volunteers to put some time in, but not feel like they're taking on a bite that they can't actually chew and swallow in the long run, you know? So I think that's really wonderful.
You have to align with their interests too, you know, because people will do things for you out of charity or out of, you know, the kindness of their heart only so far. But if you're able to say, look, we've got something here, like coworking.org, which gets tons of traffic and it's in a position to be really helpful, then how can you use this to help you raise awareness about coworking in your area and help you grow your business? Right. And so if we can say, hey, look, the potential's here and it can be hugely beneficial to you, but we need some help to get there, then, you know, I think it helps to foster a sense of shared ownership. If we say, hey, look, this vehicle benefits all of us, let's make it better together. And I think that notion of inherent transience is important in the co-working space as well. One of the issues we see happen in the co-working space, and it's very, very much in common with the volunteer issue, is that people leave. And when you're a co-working space owner, you know, it can be heartbreaking. We just got past December when a lot of times members leave for the holidays, they travel, they move out of town, and it can be very personal for a co-working space owner who, you know, you kind of want everyone to stay forever, you know, or almost everyone. But it's just not practical. It's not what we're building. You know, that everybody who comes into a co-working space comes in because they're at a point of transition in their life. And when they leave, they're at another point in transition. We're human beings, we're constantly changing. And so we have to think about people in terms of the transitions that they're making and how we can align ourselves with them. And one of the things I tell the people in my organizer club, we can't think of ourselves as space owners who are just trying to rent space to people who are going to stay forever. We have to think of ourselves almost like we're organizing a program. And maybe we cycle that program every 3 months, every 6 months, where we focus on recruiting people where they're at a point of transition. We set some intention for why they're a member of this community and what they're going to get out of it. And then at the end of that cycle, we celebrate the progress we made. And if at that point the person wants to move on, that's great, awesome, success story. We make room for a new person and a new story. And so, you know, being intentional about recognizing, you know, people are moving and we can't just hold on to things the way they are. And if we embrace that, we might actually be able to help more people and be more successful. So that's something that I'm trying to think about with all the different things that I'm doing.
Yeah, I love it. I think we are, as a world, in a really big transition place too. And I know for me, what I've been trying to just apply to every aspect of my life is allowing what is happening to be what is happening, rather than I think should have happened, and knowing that it's part of the process and that the process is unfolding, and just trusting in that, which is really hard at the time that we're in the world, for sure. But I think really important, both for peace of mind, but also for the movement, because if we're feeling like we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, or things aren't working the way we thought they were, then we're not allowing things to unfold as they will. And we're not, you know, I'm going to get really esoteric here, but we're really not allowing sort of that abundance that the universe has to flow back and forth. We're closing that off. And I think that it's important to be able to really acknowledge that freedom of movement allows for more growth than less growth. So awesome.
I agree. And again, you know, this is what we run into. I think a lot of people watching this are probably co-working space managers. And, you know, we can get into a really nasty funk when you're running a space where, you know, once the doors are open, it's very easy to just try to kind of coast along and keep things running the way that they are. And that can absolutely kill it for the members, for you, you know, to just try to keep going after what you think you're supposed to be doing every day and just running it the way that you think you're supposed to be running it. And, you know, we have to tune back into, you know, why do I care? Why is this important? What is my real purpose and what am I trying to accomplish? And just operating the office space every day is a huge accomplishment. And really, you know, having opened and closed a co-working space now, every day that your space is open is an absolute blessing. And it's a day that you're making a huge impact on your community. But at the same time, we can't just settle for that, right? What we're doing, the reason that we get into running a co-working space is not because we dream of operating an office space is because we want to have a real impact in the world. We want to help shift the culture in our cities for the better. And so we have to stay tuned into that. We have to be having fun. We have to be trying risky stuff. And again, you know, what I want to try to emphasize with everybody who's out there is just tune into what feels good, do what feels right, be awesome. New York City, people still love it and miss it in New York. And there's still nothing quite like it. There are lots of great spaces in New York, but there was nothing quite like New York City. And the reason wasn't because we had a great space. Our space was kind of a mess, and it was underfunded, and you know, all that stuff. But we had better parties than anybody, right? we did crazy stuff. Like we invented a fake startup, and then it blew up online, and then we threw a launch party for it. Like we had a launch party for a startup that doesn't exist, right? That was an awesome time. And when people remember that, when people remember New York City, you know, they might remember a happy moment they had sitting there working at their desk, but man, they really remember that party, you know, and having those bonding experiences, having a big dinner for Thanksgiving, you know, or even a winter feast, you know, like doing something where you're eating together, you're drinking together, you're dancing together, you're bonding, you're opening up to each other, you know, just having real experiences. You know, if you run a space, you can do whatever you want in that space, you know, so let's do something different. Let's do something that will shock people and, you know, really get people, you know, thinking differently, because we need a hell of a lot more of that now.
Yes, I love it, Tony. Well, so let's talk about the 5 entities that you manage as Open Coworking.
Yeah.
So you manage the Coworking Wiki, the Coworking Visa, the Coworking Google Group, the Coworking Leadership Slack Channel, and the Coworking Blog. That's a lot of work. What do you do for each of those? What does Open Coworking and the team who's behind Open Coworking do for each of those entities?
Yeah, you know, again, it's amazing because these things were built from scratch by volunteers over the course of 10 years' time. And what's amazing is when I joined Open Coworking, one of the first things I did was just do an audit of all of these platforms, figure out, you know, how do they run? Who is administering these things? Who's in charge here? You know, and I would say that probably the most valuable and most important one, and if you're listening and if you're not on it, go join it right now, is the Coworking Google Group. Go to coworking.org, the link's right there. And that group has 5,000-6,000 people on it now. Global group, discussions happening about coworking every day, highly valuable. And you think, okay, this is an extremely important piece of this global movement. How does it run? Who's in charge? And so I went in, I looked at the back-end administration, and there's a number of people who are admins. And when you join, an administrator has to approve your request, so we don't have spammers. And so I just went through the list of all the admins, and I knew half of them, I hadn't seen them active on the group in a long time. And the other half, even some of those folks, I didn't know if they were active or not. And I just emailed all of them and I said, who among you is actually administering this? And I got a few responses from people, and some of them were from people I haven't heard from in years. And they just said, yeah, you know, when I see a request come in, I give it a look when I have a chance and I approve it, and, you know, that's it. And I just was thinking, my God, this thing is so important. And if you know, just a couple of these people walked away from it, it would start to fall apart. Mm-hmm. But it works. You know, those people do stick around, and every now and then we add another administrator, you know, and it just, that's all it takes, right? Is that there are just enough people who care and enough people who kind of, you know, come up to refresh it, that, you know, that it sticks around. I think for some of the other resources, we're still rebuilding that infrastructure. I spent a lot of time last year just with coworking.org. We, as a collective community, and you could look up the story to this, it's absolutely incredible, this story. But coworking.org was eventually purchased by us, by the community. Alex Hillman led the charge in raising some funds for it, and then we bought it, and then it just kind of was like a very simple landing page for a long time. And so last year I actually built a more proper landing page for it that makes it a little bit easier to find the resources, understand that co-working is a movement, what the story is of it, that kind of stuff. And so we did that. We redesigned the blog. The next big one is the wiki and the Visa, really, because it's so big. It's so easy for it to get outdated, for it to get messy, but it gets so much traffic. It gets like 100,000 visits a year. And so we're trying to contend with how to make this a healthy content platform. I think that's going to be driven largely by Visa overhaul, and then we'll kind of go backwards from there. But what I want to do is, going back to that volunteer effort, make it something where everyone has a chance to participate and contribute value and maybe tell the story of what's happening in their city. But Iris, I want to tell you, really, I think at this point, there aren't many people who care about co-working as much as I do. It's not enough in its current form. Co-working is 10 years old, and it doesn't have enough defenses against the lowest common denominator. A lot of people associate co-working with just being kind of another way of renting office space. And, the issue that we have when we look at, how do we overhaul the wiki? How do we overhaul the co-working New York City wiki page for the Coworking Wiki is, basically people are just using it to advertise that they have a workspace. And, it could be just an office space. How do we really distinguish that? How do we overhaul that if we don't have a clear sense of what the real purpose is here? And so part of me wants to say, look, as much as we want to improve these resources, we need to really get in touch with why we're doing this again first. And in my mind, and again, I care about co-working so much, but co-working doesn't really matter on its own. I mean, you can build a co-working space, you can get people to come work there, but if that's all you're doing, like, we're missing a really big opportunity here. And so what I'm working on this year is trying to galvanize what the purpose is behind what we're doing, and saying, look, maybe you run a co-working space, and if you do, you have probably dealt with a huge identity crisis at some point. And if you haven't, then you're about to. Sorry, but you probably are, right? Because running a space isn't exciting on its own, right? So what I want to do is step back and say, okay, forget that we have a space, right? Don't even think about it. Think about why you're doing what you're doing. Why is it important that we bring people together in community? Why is it important to educate people as to, the value of empowered communities of peers? What does it look like to imagine a world where traditional employment doesn't exist anymore, because that's where we're going, and people have to make this tough transition into actually being self-sufficient and to relying on each other for work and for support and for all of these things. And then how can we foster that in our cities and help to shift the narratives that we're seeing for the better? And then after thinking a lot about that, then we think, how can we use the space for this? And how can we maybe use other spaces in our town for this? But first, we got to get at that mission, right? What is a better version of our city that we want to see? How can we be fostering that in a way that is urgent, in a way that is exciting, in a way that is reaching people that aren't just the converted? Because a lot of the people who can pay $300, $400, $500, $600 a month for a co-working desk, those are the people who've already figured it out. How can we be getting at the people who are just barely discovering this, or maybe just able to discover this, if only they could be exposed the way I was exposed 10 years ago to the possibility of this? Right now there are millions of people who are waiting for jobs to come back, and they're not coming back. And so, how do we shift that culture? How do we expose people to what's possible? And if we can get at that mission, forget that we are running an office space or that we're involved in or whatever it is, get at that mission and figure out, how can I be going after that mission every single day in a way that feels good to me, in a way that's really making a difference? Then let that drive, sales to your co-working space, or building a culture, or helping a lot of the elusive issues that co-working spaces are dealing with. That stuff all solves itself if you're just going out and focusing on kicking ass every day. And so anyway, I got off topic a little bit, but I think we have to get at that purpose before any of those resources that open co-working manages are really going to be ready to go at it for the next 10 years.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and I have several questions that I want to ask about open co-working, but I want to be, responsible with our time here. So let's talk about funding. I know that open co-working is desperately in need of funding, and you mentioned wanting to raise a lot of money. What's the current funding strategy?
So for me, for open co-working, at this point, I'm honestly not concerned about it. I worked on raising it for a while, and I think that there is a great way of making open co-working something that's very well funded. But at this point, I think my strategy is to zero in on that resonant mission. Yes. And get people excited about that first, and then come back to, okay, how can this feed open co-working? How can this feed other organizations, right? The Global Co-working Conference, which we both love, right? Juicy. What's the path for that going forward? What's the path for a lot of other things that we need? So for me, at this point, I want to get back to the mission first. And then once we've really rallied people in a way that I think co-working was able to rally people in previous years, then I think funding won't be an issue.
I love that, Tony, because what you're really saying is you're speaking, or you're following your own advice in terms of the advice that you're offering to operators and to organizers to really think about what's the impetus. Why are you actually doing this? What's the reasons behind what you're doing? And you're saying the same thing for open co-working. So that's awesome.
Iris, it's funny, you're reminding me that I actually had the good fortune of being able to go to the 99U conference in New York a couple of years back. And I was talking, I got a chance to actually meet Simon Sinek, the author of Start With Why and that awesome TED Talk. And I was telling him, like, I really want to get this movement going, but I'm not sure what to do about it. And it's like a lot of work and I can't get the money. And he just cut me off and he's like, look, whatever it is that you're trying to do, you can't do it alone. Mm-hmm. So stop trying to do it yourself, and get out there and get other people to help you do it. And then it's so funny because he's obviously like a busy, popular guy at a conference. And so he only gave me 20 seconds, but he gave me that tiny bit of advice. And then he shook my hand and he handed me this little coin. I don't know if you could see this on the screen, but it has the why, what, and how, the why, how, and what in concentric circles. And he said, here's a token of inspiration. And I keep it with me on my desk here. It's Amy's desk, my partner's desk, but I keep it here. And it reminds me every day, the why, really, you got to start with that and keep coming back to it every single day. And we need that more than ever right now. There are a lot of people really, really scared. A lot of people really scared because they're out of work, they're underemployed, their job is about to be replaced by a robot car. And that can, when people are scared, it can go one of two ways. Either those people get unscared because they become empowered and they become masters of their own destiny because they find a local community of people to help them, or they become prone to manipulation and that's where things get really scary. And so, really, we have an urgent task. And when I first discovered co-working 10 years ago, I thought, this is it. This is the future. This is the way that people are going to repair their crappy relationship with work as we know it and move into a better direction. But honestly, the movement has failed to achieve that dream fast enough to avert the alternative, which is that, people get more extreme, more scared, more polarized because of that fear. And so, I think we have an urgent need now to get back to that why and really talk about, if we care about this co-working thing because we see that it can do better, then we need to step up our game and get serious and really try to get at those people who need to be exposed to what's possible. So that's where I'm focused on with open co-working, with my group coaching practice, with all the other stuff that I'm doing this year, is just renewing that sense of mission.
I love it. And you've answered a lot of my questions about what's next for you and what's next for open co-working. But tell us, how can volunteers get involved? So if somebody decides, they want to volunteer, how do they do so?
Yeah, so you can go to coworking.org. There is, I would say, honestly, at this point, your best bet is join that Google group, introduce yourself, just make yourself known in this movement. You can go to opencoworking.org and you can sign up to be a volunteer there. Like I said, we're getting the volunteers more activated starting this month. But at this point, follow Iris, follow me, get involved in your local community, befriend the other co-working space people, collaborative space people, the maker space people in your town, and organize. Honestly, just organize. Like organizers are literally people who take separateness and eradicate it and replace it with togetherness. And we need that more than ever right now. So whether it's with Open Coworking or other organizations, whatever it is, organize something in your community and you will be doing your part.
I love it. And you can use the jelly format to do that, the bar camp, the unconference. There's so many different ways to do it, but it's all about the organizing.
That's right.
That's amazing. So Tony, before we go, there was one thing that we were talking about before we went live today. And we were talking about sort of promotion, promotion of your product, promotion of your space, and promotion of yourself. And you had something you wanted to say about that. I was just mentioning that for myself with this show, with this series, I shy away from over promoting it, or what I see as over promoting it, because I don't want to spam people, and I have a hard time with that. And I've been told by several people that I've had this conversation with that to remind myself that I'm promoting the movement and I'm promoting the people that I'm interviewing, and so it's a benefit to everybody. And also that people sometimes might want to hear what I have to say as well, which is also a benefit. So. And you had something you wanted to say, so I wanted to give you a chance to say that today.
Yeah, well, I think if you make it about yourself, if you make it about self-promotion, then, there are a lot of other people who are playing that game, and, the social media world is just so noisy. It's insane. And I'm trying to do as much as I can offline and through non-social channels, just because I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity to kind of zig where everyone else is zagging. But think of it in terms of this. I'm going to log into Twitter and I'm going to check my feed. And what I see when I log in is going to be something that somebody else shared, or it's going to be something that you shared. And honestly, I'd probably rather read what you're going to share. So, I mean, that's what it comes down to, is if you have a voice that needs to be heard, if you have, something that you really care about, that you truly believe in, and you think it's going to inspire people, I want that voice to get heard. Because, the person who is posting, sugar stuff on Twitter, right? Like the waste of time stuff is probably going to be louder, and they're not going to care, So like, we need to be loud. Now's the time to be loud about empowering people, about what's happening and what's important, and why it's urgent that we, maybe we check online to see what's going on and get inspired, but then get the hell off of social media and start doing something in real life. And that's one of the things that's beautiful about co-working, is it's happening in real life. And technology enables us to do that because we have laptops and Wi-Fi, and we can leave the house, leave the office, and go congregate. But that's where the technology for me really needs to stop. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've caught myself, in MailChimp in my co-working space, trying to think about how to send out a newsletter blast that's going to connect with the people that are literally standing around me as I'm sitting there at my computer. Like the beauty, like it's right there. Shut the lid and go do something, So, I mean, if you can use your channels to inspire people, if you can send out a tweet, if you can, promote the hell out of this broadcast, and then this broadcast gets someone to say, wow, this is awesome. I'm going to stop scrolling. I'm going to shut my damn lid, and I'm going to go build a community now. I'd much rather it be that than whatever the hell else is going to be in the social media stream.
Love it. So much good stuff here today, Tony. Well, we're just at the end of our time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the vision for the future of the co-working movement. I think you covered a little bit of that in Open Co-working, but let's talk about the big piece of the movement itself.
So picture, we live in kind of a place where lots of things are possible, right? And if you picture where things are headed, you can picture that things are headed in a very dark, scary place. And, you know, you can say, look, things are going to get darker and worse and scarier, and maybe they will, but maybe things will get a lot better. Maybe we will figure out how to navigate this really big, scary transition of employment as we know it going away, and the way that that challenges so many things about our identity. Maybe we can learn how to do that in a peaceful way, that we can be excited about the possibilities that allows, and that we figure out how to do that as a people. And honestly, I really think it's not going to come from politics. It's not going to come from the top down. It's not going to come from some big company that hires everybody. You know, it's going to come from the bottom up. It's going to come from culture. It's going to come from people teaching each other one tiny bit at a time, town by town, how to make this transition as human beings together. That's the future of coworking, is as a vehicle for helping people make this massive generational, multi-generational shift away from the old way of thinking about work, about money, about value, all of these things. And that means an identity shift for coworking as well, because if we let ourselves think too much about office space and cost per square foot and what color desk to get, like, it's a waste of time, and we don't have time for that anymore, because the world needs us to step up, honestly, and do far better, far faster. And so the future of coworking for me is that we, you know, suck it up, and we really start to focus on what it is that makes our communities important. And we get to work, and we get to work fast, and we get to work hard. And we get ourselves on that better path. We avert dystopia, and we get ourselves just a few inches closer to utopia. And then we get to it right now.
I love it. And we organize. We do that by organizing in real life.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, Tony, is there anything else you want to say today?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot I want to say. I mean, I'll just say, if you're thinking of organizing, a lot of people are afraid of organizing. They're afraid of public speaking, putting themselves out there. It can be two people, right? It can be one person that shows up. But you can be life-changing with that person. That person could end up, you know, if you say, okay, I'm going to try something. I want to organize a little thing, you know, a little meetup group in a cafe, or an accountability group. I do motivation groups, which are awesome, right? Collaborative motivation groups. If one person shows up, that person could end up being your co-founder. They can end up being a person who connects you to someone who invests in your efforts, right? They could end up being your #1 evangelist, or they could just end up being an awesome friend who gets it, right? If one person shows up to your event, that's the person who is willing to give it a try, even though they didn't know you, they didn't see any social proof, they didn't wait until there were 20 other RSVPs. You know, this was a person who was so ready for this that they were willing to show up, right? And then maybe it's 3 people, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 500 people show up to your event. Whatever it is, you're doing a good thing, and you're making an impact. And just follow what's real and what's true and what's human and what you care about, because other people will resonate with that. And that's the only way this is going to work. So don't be afraid to organize. Don't make it a big deal. Don't worry about social media, for God's sakes, and just go be a real human and spread that culture to as many people as you can. And we're going to do this one bit at a time together.
Good words. Don't be afraid to organize. Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure interviewing you today. And I know that with you as one of the leaders in this movement, that we're going to make really good things happen this year. So I'm excited.
Let's do it, Iris. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and I appreciate you doing these interviews. I think they're important.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today. For other episodes, you can go to coworkingwithiris.co, where you can subscribe to the podcast. Keep doing the great work you're doing every day, and happy 2017.
Bye.